In the heart of 17th century Madrid, hidden behind the stone facades of its most devout streets, stood a convent unlike any other. Its walls were thick, its windows narrow, and the air that moved through its cloisters carried the scent of candle wax and whispered prayers. Outsiders passed by without a glance, thinking it just another home of quiet souls devoted to God. But inside those walls, something stirred, something forbidden, something that would one day shake the very foundations of the Spanish Church. This is not the story of saints or martyrs. It is the story of desire dressed as devotion. It is the story of the nuns of San Placido, whose hearts learned to crave what the heavens had forbidden. The year was 1628. Spain still ruled vast oceans, its empire glimmering under the banners of faith and conquest. Yet within its capital, in the echo of church bells and the constant eyes of the Inquisition, sin had found a way to disguise itself as holiness. The convent of San Placido had been recently founded, an act of piety by Don Geronimo de Villanueva, a man of noble blood and powerful connections. He had built it for the souls of noble daughters, women promised to silence, chastity, and prayer. They entered the convent dressed in white, but they would not all remain unstained. Their spiritual guide was a Benedictine monk named Fray Francisco Garcia Calderón, known for his passionate sermons and mystical fervour. To the world he was a man of God. To the women of San Placido he was something far more complex, a father, a confessor, a mirror of temptation. He spoke of divine ecstasy, of love so pure that it transcended the flesh, but those words, once sown into the fragile minds of the cloistered, began to blossom into dangerous dreams. At first, it was only whispers. A novice claimed that during prayer she had felt the touch of angels, soft and trembling on her skin. Another swore she had heard Christ himself call her by name, his voice filled not with command but with longing. The sisters gathered in the chapel and trembled as invisible hands seemed to guide them into rapture. They believed it holy, but outside, in the records of the Inquisition, those same tremors would soon be written as signs of possession. Nights grew heavy inside San Placido. The sisters would fall into trances, their bodies writhed on the cold floor as if caught between heaven and hell. They spoke in strange tongues, their eyes rolled back, their lips murmuring forbidden prayers. Fray Francisco stood among them, cross in hand, whispering verses meant to calm them, but his own eyes shone with an intensity that betrayed the serenity of faith. He told them that in perfect grace the body no longer sinned, that love could become a form of worship. Some wept, some believed, and others, poor frightened souls, let themselves be consumed by that idea. Between confession and caress, between ecstasy and sin, the line began to vanish. Soon, the rumours reached the streets of Madrid. Merchants, courtiers, even priests spoke of strange happenings within San Placido. It was said that the convent was haunted not by demons, but by desire itself, that beneath the chants of the psalms there were sighs, that beneath the holy robes there were trembling bodies awakening to a hunger they did not understand. Some said the devil had entered through the confessional, wearing the face of a monk. Others whispered that perhaps it was not the devil at all, but God testing the boundaries of human devotion. For the nuns, their isolation was both a cage and a fever. They had no mirror, no visitor, no world beyond the barred window that let a sliver of light into their cells. Only one man was permitted to cross the threshold, their confessor, and so the same lips that spoke their sins were the only ones who answered them. It was inevitable that temptation would come dressed as redemption. Among the sisters, a few became the centre of fearful admiration. One, whose name history has erased, claimed to have nightly visions of Christ descending to her bed in radiant light. She described his voice, his hands, his embrace. Her sisters believed her at first, until those visions became too human, too earthly. She was said to have confessed, trembling, that she no longer knew if what she felt was divine or profane. Another, younger and more fragile, was heard crying during the night, begging forgiveness for pleasures she could not resist. And still another swore that Fray Francisco had touched her soul through acts she dared not name. By the time the first investigator was sent to San Placido, the convent was already a battlefield of faith and hysteria. Some nuns defended their confessor as a saint, others broke down and accused him of leading them to sin. The visitor from the Inquisition listened to their confessions by candlelight, the wax melting like tears down the walls. What he wrote that night would become one of the most disturbing testimonies in the archives of the Holy Office. He described a place where ecstasy and terror lived side by side, where women believed they had found God in the arms of a man. The court of Madrid could not ignore it. The whispers had grown too loud. Some claimed that Don Geronimo himself had entered the convent under the cover of darkness to comfort, or to corrupt, the women he had sworn to protect. There were even darker rumours, that the king's curiosity had been piqued, that Felipe IV himself wished to see the miracle of the possessed nuns. Whether he did or not, the story reached his ears, and the stain spread across the royal court like spilled ink. When the inquisitors finally came, they came in silence. Black robes, crucifixes, and the cold authority of divine law. They entered the convent like surgeons cutting into a wound. Every diary, every relic, every whispered prayer was seized and catalogued. The sisters were interrogated one by one, their trembling hands clutching rosaries as questions tore open the secrets they had tried to bury. Some fainted, some screamed, some insisted they had done nothing but love God in the only way they knew. But love, in that time, was not a virtue. It was evidence. Fray Francisco was dragged from his cell in chains. Witnesses said his eyes were calm, even as he was accused of heresy, solicitation, and demonic manipulation. He denied nothing, yet confessed everything in words that only deepened the mystery. If they sinned, he said, it was because they loved too perfectly. The inquisitors called it blasphemy. But to the women who had once knelt before him, those words were a dagger and a prayer all at once. The trials were merciless. Under torture, confessions multiplied like plague. A novice declared that the devil had kissed her disguised as Christ. Another swore she'd seen Fray Francisco glow with unholy light. The Inquisition wrote, rewrote, and twisted their words into the shape of damnation. And while the outside world rejoiced that justice had been done, within the convent the silence grew unbearable. The bells rang for prayer, but no one sang. Years later, when all that remained of the case were scattered pages and rumours, a traveller passed by the convent at dusk. He said he heard the faint sound of weeping behind the walls, like the ocean trapped in stone. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was the memory of those forbidden desires, the ones that tempted not just the flesh but the church itself. Years passed, but the echo of that scandal did not fade. The Inquisition, relentless in its hunger for purification, had made San Placido its example, a living sermon of fear. The once lively cloisters became halls of penance, and the air itself seemed to remember the screams that had been swallowed by prayer. Each dawn began with silence so heavy it felt like stone pressing against the soul. The sisters rose, eyes hollow, hands trembling, their faith now a wound rather than a refuge. The walls that once resonated with hymns were now marked by candle soot and blood from self-flagellation. Inside their narrow cells, the nuns of San Placido were told to redeem themselves through suffering. Some took it to heart, believing pain could cleanse what love had defiled. They fasted until their bodies weakened. They knelt until their knees bled through their habits. The confessional, once a place of whispered tenderness, became an altar of shame. The very same walls that had hidden their secrets now bore witness to their punishment. Fray Francisco was sent far from Madrid to a monastery forgotten by the map. There, behind locked doors and endless nights of prayer, he wasted away. Records say he lived many years in silence, forbidden to preach, forbidden even to write. They say he was seen walking through the cloisters with his hands bound in rope, murmuring the same sentence over and over. If they sinned, it was because they loved too perfectly. No one ever knew if those words were an act of repentance or defiance. He died without absolution, and his name was erased from the registers of his order. To the world he became a ghost, a warning more than a man. Don Jerónimo de Villanueva, the founder and protector of San Placido, fared little better. His power, once envied in the court of Felipe IV, crumbled under the weight of suspicion. The same nobles who had praised his piety now whispered that he had built the convent as a cover for indulgence. Accused of corruption and blasphemy, he was stripped of his honours and confined to a cell darker than the one he had endowed for his beloved nuns. When death finally came for him, it was not a public execution, but a quiet suffocation in the damp of his own disgrace. He was buried without ceremony, his name mentioned only in secret as the man who had angered both God and king. But the story did not end with their downfall. the women of San Placido remained, locked away in perpetual silence. Their numbers dwindled as the years dragged on. Those who survived carried their memories like invisible chains. Some lost their minds, whispering to shadows that no one else could see. Others clung to prayer, reciting psalms not to be heard by heaven, but to drown the noise within their heads. The church called it purification. History would later call it cruelty. Outside, Madrid continued to grow and change. Empires rose and fell. Kings died. The Inquisition itself would one day fade into dust. Yet the convent endured, its stones absorbing every century that passed. Visitors who came to deliver goods or messages sometimes spoke of strange sensations, an unshakable cold, a murmur behind the walls, a flicker of candlelight where no one stood. The city forgot the details of what had happened there, but the legend remained that within San Placido, holy vows had once become instruments of sin, and the line between divine ecstasy and damnation had been forever blurred. In later centuries, scholars would search for the trial documents. Some were found, eaten by mould, the ink fading like a voice losing strength. Others had vanished entirely, perhaps burned, perhaps hidden by hands unwilling to let the past speak. The fragments that survived were contradictory, testimonies of women whose fear and faith were indistinguishable, notes from inquisitors who recorded sin as though cataloguing insects. One page describes a nun claiming she saw Christ appear in her cell. Another notes that she later retracted her vision under threat of torture. Which version was true? Neither, perhaps. Both, perhaps. The truth in San Placido was always divided. There is a cruel irony in the way history treats such stories. The names of kings, confessors, and judges are preserved in stone. The names of the women are lost. They are remembered only as the nuns of San Placido, a collective shadow with no faces, no voices. They had surrendered everything, their families, their freedom, their bodies, even their own version of the truth. What remained was silence, an eternal vow imposed not by God but by men. Even now, 4 centuries later, the convent still stands. Tourists pass it daily, unaware of what sleeps beneath its quiet facade. The bells still ring, but their sound is hollow, echoing through corridors once soaked in tears. On some nights, when the wind slides through the narrow streets of Madrid, neighbours say they hear faint singing, an old Latin chant mixed with something softer, almost like weeping. The sisters who live there now, the last of a dying order, never speak of it. They claim the walls make strange noises as the temperature changes, but those who know the legend say it is not the cold that makes the stones sigh, it is memory. The story of San Placido is not a tale of demons or miracles. It is a confession carved into history by fear. It shows how easily faith can be twisted when it is chained to power, and how the pursuit of purity can destroy the very souls it seeks to save. The desires of those women, repressed, condemned, unspoken, were never erased. They became part of the convent's foundation, buried deep within its stones like relics of forbidden love. And every time a prayer is whispered there, perhaps it passes through those same echoes, brushing against the ghosts of the women who prayed before them, who were told that even love could be a sin. So if you ever walk through Madrid and find yourself before the silent gates of San Placido, pause for a moment. Listen. You might feel the air grow still, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Somewhere beyond those walls, unseen hands still trace the rosary, unseen lips still ask for forgiveness, or maybe for oblivion. Because the story of San Placido is not over. As long as someone remembers it, the voices of those nuns continue to whisper through time, reminding us that the holiest places often hide the deepest shadows.